Welcome to this artist talk for rituals, which will be on view for this remaining week, closing on January 30th. We are in conversation today with the three artists, starting with Brenton Good, who is a painter, printmaker, and professor of art at Messiah University in Grantham, Pennsylvania. His work is in collections throughout the United States, as well as the UAE and Turkey. And then we are also here with Mandy Cano-Villalobos, who is an interdisciplinary artist based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She's exhibited throughout the United States, as well as Berlin, Germany, and Puerto Montt, Chile. She's received her Master of Fine Arts from the George Washington University in DC. And then finally, we have Marissa Voytenko, who is an encaustic painter based in the Chicago suburbs. She's represented by several galleries throughout the United States, and her work has been on the covers of the American Psychologist and Comment magazine. And then I am Alex Sinitsia. I am the marketing coordinator for the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art. And we also have Christina Vishnitsky with us, who is our curatorial assistant. So I would really love to kick off the conversation by first thanking all of you guys for your time today. And I'm so excited to speak with you all and just learn more about all of your work and how this exhibition came together. So I'd really like to start with the title of the exhibition and how rituals are integral to each of your works and kind of how you all arrived at that.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to go first?
Who's brave today?
The title of it really was kind of coined by Mandy. She came up with it. And
I don't remember that at all. I thought that was totally you. All right.
No. But I mean, rituals is like a sequence, defined as like a sequence of gestures, words, actions, and performed in a sequence. And I know for all of our work, I think it has that. I mean, whether it's our process or the outcome, I think they all evidence that ritualistic way of making.
But I think something that I'm particularly interested in with the idea of ritual as it relates to process, well, and image, is this idea that, well, you use the word sequence, right? But to an extent, when you're doing something again and again and again in a repetitious way, that idea of sequence starts to become null, and you enter into a kind of different sense of time where that idea of chronological progression kind of opens itself up to this atemporal presence that that I think is something that unites all of our work, like an understanding of how ritual can transcend. Well, actually, period. Let's just leave it at that. How ritual can transcend.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think all three of us find the studio practice itself is ritualistic. Going into the studio and making things can be a ritual, but I think also the objects we make end up kind of sharing some of that with the viewer in a variety of ways. I think for all three of us, it was a very common denominator for all of us.
Yeah, and I don't know how y'all see ritual, but just in terms of the way that I think about the objects that are the outcome of the process, I have difficulty, like, I think it's interesting that we, in a way, aren't making images. Like here's what I mean when I say that. That it's instead the objects that are produced are kind of these relics that are left over from the ritual versus us trying to make some sort of representational image that communicates a certain message, if that makes any sense.
It's like what's the term? index, right? It's indexical, that thing that's left behind after we're done kind of making the art, right? That vestige of the process is so important to all three of us, I think.
Definitely. And I think it's definitely work that really invites the viewer to want to spend time with it, to kind of almost pick apart the process in that way, because all of your works are so like highly textured. They're so colorful, they're so rich in so many different ways. And one of my favorite parts about this exhibition is just the time that you want to spend with it and really absorb the work, really look at it, walk around it, look from piece to piece, and just the way it all comes together in the gallery is so special. It almost seems like all the work can come from one artist who works in different mediums. And I would love to hear more about how the exhibition came together, because I know there's a little bit of a story to it through social media, that you all connected with each other to kind of get this project moving. Marissa, about how this exhibition came together, because I know that there's a bit of a story through it, you reaching out through social media to kind of bring everyone together. So I'd love it if you could share that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've known Brenton for a long time. He and I both went to a study abroad program in Italy in 1999. And then we had like no communication, because really there wasn't Facebook back then or Instagram. And then I don't know how I found you, Brenton, whether it was Instagram or I saw your website somehow, but I saw your work and I was like, wow, like I get, like I understand, because you're working in grids, like that's, I understand what you're doing. And it was so beautiful. And I was in awe of it. And I've known Mandy for a while. We both lived in Grand Rapids for a time. And I met Mandy at a live art auction at the Urban Institute of Contemporary Art.
You have a much better memory than I do. It's like we did? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and we're represented by the same gallery. So I was seeing what Mandy was doing and Brenton was doing on Instagram, and seeing these like threads of connection, especially in Mandy's, some of her work that she does a lot of stitching. And yeah, I was just seeing these connections. And so I was like, these two people, I don't think they know each other, but they need to know each other. And so there was just a conversation after that of like, what do you think about exhibiting together? That's kind of how it started.
Amazing. And then, okay, so speaking of your work, Mandy, I would love to hear a bit about the found objects in your work and where you gather them, how you select them, and kind of that process of how your pieces come together.
Yeah, so I think that in order to like get a good sense of what found objects are to me, I always point back to my childhood, which so my mom joined the army and took me with her. So she was a single mom, you know, traveling around with this little kid. And I always wanted to have like a sense of home, because, you know, people on TV had homes. Like, how come I didn't get to have like a house with a yard, and like, where's dad? You know, like, can I get a dog too? So I think what I've always done is to kind of make up for a lot of the absences. I crammed my life with stuff. So I think I officially started collecting antiques at the age of 10. Or I remember saving a chunk of cheese once when I was 8 and putting it in a ring box, and then finding it again like when I was 14 and opening the ring box, and it was just, you know, half cheese, half mold. It actually preserved really well. I always think about that. I don't know why. But so it's always about like preserving things. And trying to, particularly things that have a history, so that I can somehow like couch my history within this kind of found object context or worldwide context, or some sort of narrative that I want to get at. And then how how these objects kind of find a new life. So they were used at some point in time, and they were touched, and they were somehow precious in some way, and then they're released. How is that a reflection of American consumerism? How is that a reflection of like our desire for something permanent, but like we're always putting it on stuff instead of like anything that really means anything? So I kind of see objects as being this really shoddy imitation of home, of like trying to like grasp a sense of belonging.
And for the objects in your work, which I imagine must also be tied to memories, like the times and places that you were when you collected them, do you find that when you put them together in your works, you'll use objects from a specific period to reflect that, or is it an accumulation?
I really actually this that like touches on all of my grad school work. I was very much like, what's interesting is like I did all this stuff in grad school and then I departed from it, and now I find myself coming back to it. But it's this idea of taking all of these like disparate things with disparate histories and from disparate people. You never really know where these are coming from, but for some reason they're always somewhat familiar. So you're taking these different things and you're kind of like cramming their histories together. And in that way, you're not negating a sense of like unified time, but instead you're coming to understand time in a way that's kind of this all at onceness. I think is it Susan Sontag who wrote about like the collection, how it's like a collapse of time. And so that's kind of something that I'm interested in doing. How do you create a new sense of being? And when I say that, I'm, wrapping up like ideas of identity, ideas of like memory, ideas of culture, whatever it is, like, how do you put all these things together in a way that doesn't negate their past, but rather like affirms their past and then offers a new present, a new sense of whatever that thing is that you're looking for.
Yeah, and there definitely is that sense of a universality to the work. I think that also happens when the viewer engages with it and sort of picks out the objects within your greater works, and those can trigger memories in them or associations or just even a recognition.
Yeah, and that's totally what I'm going for. That, that's the reason I use like candy wrappers and little boy undies and like human hair, like it's stuff that makes up life. And how does that touch upon like everyone, but also saying that like I totally get the fact like it's coming from a Western context, it's not because I feel like that's the culture that I can appropriate because it's mine, so how do we take the stories that we own and continually like dynamically transform them and apply them to the now, no matter how old those stories are? Sorry, I'm talking a lot. Somebody else talk.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to turn to Brenton next because the way you were talking about childhood and kind of a family history, I'm really curious, Brenton, about the inspiration of quilts in your work and where that comes from. Does that come from like a grandmother who made quilts? Like I know quilts can hold so much history, so many stories, so much significance. So would love to learn more about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And it is a grandmother's quilt, like to the item, but after like a long period of fighting against it, maybe. So like I ended up in grad school working abstractly after being a figure painter for a little bit, and then spent a long time just dealing with the history of modern art and abstraction and the grid. And it's funny, whenever I grew up in a Mennonite family, and whenever at an opening or at a talk, whenever someone found that out, they would be very quick to like look at the grid and then be like, ooh, I see quilts, right? And I'd always be like, no, how dare you? This is about modernism and the flatness of the plane and all this other stuff. And I was kind of like really like going out of my way to negate that reference point. And then a few years ago, looking at a quilt that my grandmother had made for me when I was a kid, looking at that geometry and that flatness and that abstraction, and it kind of just floored me for a minute that it was only one step removed. I mean, it was the exact same thing. It's like one step removed from Ellsworth Kelly, but it's like loaded with all this other cultural identity and reference points. So I kind of started wrestling with what it would mean to kind of engage that history also alongside the history of art and everything else I was already playing with, because it created tension in the image then that it could kind of, and I like that ambiguity. I kind of like that it's not just one thing, that it can kind of speak to different communities about different reference points, and that it's all kind of in there fighting it out a little bit. Yeah, so that's been kind of, and I've been investigating it off and on, I guess, over the past few years. I worked through a series of prints and a couple big paintings, and then I kind of thought I was done with it, and moved on to some other bodies of work. And then actually it was this show with Mandy and with Marissa that kind of gave me a reason to feel like I wasn't quite done with it, I don't think. And I kind of went back to it last spring and started making these new prints that are in the show. And then finally seeing it in the space with Mandy's work and with Marissa's work was awesome, because we hadn't really been in, I think, conversation about palettes and about, forms and things, and seeing it in the space was really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the palettes especially just work together so well, so seamlessly. Like all of the works are in conversation with each other. And speaking of palette and color choices, Marissa, I'd love to learn more about the psychological aspects of your work and the use of color harmonies and how you determine to construct your pieces.
Yeah, I tend to work in a limited color palette. I really enjoy the challenge of trying to create as many variations of a hue or a tint, or a shade as possible. I think there's a lot of beauty in just like pulling that out and that like color spectrum. And yeah, I think it's just that those subtle shifts between colors that I'm really after, that I'm really, there's maybe, I don't know if ethereal is the right word, but there's like almost transcendent quality to just these subtle shifts in color. And so that's what I'm after in my work or focusing on. The psychological, I feel like it comes from all over, but it's basically, whatever I'm taking in, I'm filtering through this like grid in my mind, and then putting back out onto the panel. So I feel like in a way I'm kind of an abstract expressionist in a way. Like I'm feeling it. I'm wrestling with something in my mind, and it comes back out.
Yeah, and in such a controlled and intentional way. And yeah.
Yeah. I Brenton, you just mentioned Ellsworth Kelly, and I have been reading. There was a quote, if I could just share it, because it really resonated with me, from this book. It said, "Grids are human marks, orthogonals of life, set up as rational and scientific schemes for charting and quantifying. Their horizontal lines imply our landscape horizon, as their verticals suggest growth, nature, and the figure. They satisfy needs for display of various information, control, and boundary." And especially the last line, that control, order, and boundary, resonates with me, because I find it, for me, is the basis through which I see everything, and how I make sense of the world. And I always come back to it. I might twist it, I guess, or manipulate the grid, but I always find that I need that sequence. I need that structure to feel sane. So I need those boundaries.
Yeah, I hear that. I think a lot of people hear that after this 2-year period that we've gone through, needing those structure and those boundaries in our lives, and the importance of that. So for both of you, Brenton too, if you could speak about a little bit further about the importance of pattern and repetition in both of your works and the significance of that?
Sure. Marissa, you want to keep going, or should I jump in? What do you?
You can
Paper, rock,
jump in.
scissors.
That's fine.
You know, thinking through abstraction over the years, I think I used to work more intuitively and more painterly, maybe. And then even when the grid showed up, there was still kind of a tension of back and forth between chance elements, really obsessively controlled elements. But especially with this, you know, last couple bodies of work, the emergence of pattern changes that a bit. Pattern isn't so much about individual expressive marks, maybe, and it becomes even more and more flat, which I've been really enjoying. You know, teaching for a number of years and teaching color theory a lot. I've been obsessed with Joseph Albers for a long time. I think he's terrific. And that little book he put together with the students at Yale is great. But I found Annie Albers has been just kicking my butt for years now. She's awesome. Oh, she's so great. And like the fibers works, but the screen prints, I mean, the printmaking stuff too. And so I've been finding myself getting more and more kind of obsessed with Annie than necessarily Joseph. Not that I'm on like first name basis with either of them, I guess. So it's been a lot of fun, and seeing how that changes the work. Yeah, the role of pattern in it definitely. It's weird because on one hand, you know, I haven't worked through this in my head in a great way, but it's like completely different than so much of the work I've been making over the years. But then also it's identical. I don't know. It's like one step removed, but conceptually so different too. So I think to most people in the street, they would look at something I made 10 years ago and be like, that's the same painting, dude, you know, like it's the same thing. But for me, it's conceptually a really different piece, you know, because of how pattern plays a role in it.
What about you, Marissa?
Yeah, I think for me, there's been a recent change from a very strict grid to a lot more movement in my work. And I'm still digging through why that is. I know that I got to the point where I said, I can't do one more straight line anymore. A joy is really important for me in my work. And I think for any of us, if we're not really enjoying what we're doing at some level, I mean, it doesn't have to be joy can, you know, it doesn't need to be a happy thing, but if we're not.
So jumping back in, so Marissa, I think one of the last things I heard up before you started to break up on my end was speaking to how you didn't think you could make any more straight lines.
Yeah. I mean, I think the joy had just kind of slipped away. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I feel like if you don't have that joy at some level, then what's the point? You know, if you don't have the pleasure in what you're doing, then why are you continuing to do it? And so I got to the point where I was like, well, what if I just turned this line? And then I go, oh, can I? Can I do that? You know, it's the inner critic that's like, no, you need to stick to what you've been doing. Because what will people say if you turn a line? You know, and then I thought, well, I'm just going to do it anyway and see where it goes. And that was such a freeing experience because it allowed me to play. It allowed me to ask those what if questions. What if I do this? What if I do this? And so it led me on a journey of exploration, which I'm in right now. And I'm still trying to figure out what led me, you know, what shifted in my life that I could ask those questions again. So that's where I'm at, and I'm still figuring out. I'm still trying to process. But you know, how is it that I got here?
Yeah, I mean, a journey of bravery for sure, and vulnerability, and just openness to trying something new.
Yeah. I guess stepping into my fears, like, okay, maybe it's bravery, like you said.
Yeah. Or as Brene Brown would say, like daring bravely, or one of her like funky catchphrases,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of also just playing is very important too, and finding the joy in the work, which I think is so apparent in this show and really hits the viewer. I felt it immediately when I first saw everything in person, completely realized in the exhibition. And I'd love to hear, Mandy, from you about the theme of play in your work, especially in this show, in the pieces you included.
I wasn't expecting this question. Theme of play. You know, here's if I can just like speak generally about that.
Yeah.
I have a new goal this year, and it's to be rejected 100 times. So it doesn't like, I'm just going to apply to whatever, and I'm going to apply to so much, I'm going to get rejected 100 times. And I'm doing a great job right now. But part of the thing that I always think about is the idea of experimentation or of risk taking and of failure. Like, I am tired of the way that society always labels failure as bad, because unless you are willing to royally screw up, then you're not going to like every man lives, or every man like exists or whatever, but does every man truly live or whatever? I don't know, whatever the like Braveheart thing is. But it's like, to what extent do we not take risks because like we're afraid of failure? Like, I'm like, no, let's just embrace it. Let's like, if we're gonna screw up, let's really screw this up. So like, if you want to call that play, that's cool. But like, I'm just like, let's put it this way. I always think of death for a variety of different reasons, because of, familial relationships or whatever. But like, ultimately, almost everything that I do is constantly conditioned by this awareness that I'm going to die. And when I die, like, will I have wanted to spend 2 hours watching a crappy movie? And like, I'll get into a movie and I'm like, wow, I am going to die someday, and I don't want to waste this other hour. I'm going to go ahead and leave now. Or like, so like, why not screw up? Because I don't want to be on my deathbed and realize like there were all these things I wish I would have done. Hence, I quit my job recently.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Play.
Yeah. I know. But I've already made more money than I would be teaching, because I was really willing to like royally screw up. And it's going great.
Yeah. And bet on yourself too.
Right. Yeah, totally. Why?
Yeah.
Because why not? I don't want to die and be like, I taught for so many years and did not have that joy that Marissa is talking about.
Yeah, I know. I love it. Instead of having like a list of all the books you've read this year, it'll be of all of your rejections. And
Right.
that's kind of amazing.
Totally. Right. Yeah. Bring it on.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. That openness, that willing to really put yourself out there, that's huge. And I feel like I hope a lot of people have kind of been feeling that after this time that we've had, where I think we're grappling. I mean, I've always grappled with my mortality. I think about death all the time. I love that you brought this up, makes me feel less alone. But I guess this leads into one of my last questions, which is really, how has the pandemic influenced all of your art practices and your work? Like, have you kind of always had that inner voice telling you like life is short, Mandy, or has this been really inspired by kind of the collective trauma we've been through and everything that we've kind of witnessed?
Oh, the pandemic has been amazing for me. And that sounds horrible, because I know so many people, it hasn't been amazing to say the least. But No, the idea of death conditioning everything. Like my grandmother died when I was 6 months old, very unexpectedly. So that kind of trauma has been something that my mother's generation has deeply, you know, like one example that I always tell people, it's like when you leave the house, you don't know if you're coming back, so you better say goodbye. Like that's kind of how entrenched an awareness of death is. So it's like, you know, what am I going to do today? Do I really want to spend the next 5 minutes in bed? I'm going to die. You know, like I know that sounds so not normal, but yeah, the pandemic gave me an excuse because I mean, galleries weren't selling anything. So I was like, let's go back to large scale installation because why not? You know?
Definitely, definitely. What about you, Brenton or Marissa?
I would agree with Mandy. I know that it's been difficult for a lot of people, but for me, it was kind of centering because I wasn't rushing around. I wasn't driving my kids here and there to different activities. I was at home and my studio is at home. So there was less physical movement. And for me, there's a Ukrainian word, it's shum. Like there's less noise in my life. And that allowed me to feel more centered. And therefore, I think that just flowed into my work. If I'm psychologically scattered and feeling chaotic and anxious, then it comes out in my work. But if I'm more focused and more centered and feeling more sane, then that flows right into my work as well. So for me, it was a good turn of events.
Yeah, and it sounds like definitely a way for you to channel your emotions, to process.
Mm-hmm. I had more space in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe, I don't know, I've been thinking about that as well for myself personally. And I think it's definitely because, you know, we were isolated, we were at home quarantining, and it really made you sit with yourself, you know, in a lot of ways and work through whatever it was you needed to work through, whether it be personal or, you know, for your work or whatever
Certainly
was coming up.
reflective.
Yeah. What about you, Brenton?
Yeah, I think for me, looking at the prints, laying them out to choose for the show, I was struck by how many of them have kind of a tension and an anxiety in them that really wasn't in the work prior to these past 2 or 3 years. And so I don't know if it's the colors, the saturation of some of them, the pairing of some of them that just they're not nice. Like a lot of them aren't. I think over the years I have a tendency to kind of make work that is quiet and meditative and understated. I'm a big fan of gray, but I feel like some of those greens and oranges and things like don't belong together, and I found myself wanting to kind of like embrace that somewhat and make work that had a different kind of tension. And again, kind of like I think what I said earlier, for most people looking at them, you would just say, well, that looks very similar to the work you've been making for a long time. But I think for me, there's a very different spirit to the work in a way.
Definitely. There's definitely almost like kind of like a vibration energy that's happening with, like, in some cases, like the complementary colors that you're using. There definitely is like a visual tension there and a different energy, especially kind of the longer you look at it and really kind of like get absorbed in each like distinct color plane and kind of like, you know, let your eyes focus. Yeah, it's an experience.
I mean, it's definitely slow work. I mean, you can't just kind of walk past it, and I think you have to really slow down. But I think there's a reward in there for people that want to slow down. But it's surprisingly tense or anxious, I think.
Yeah, I mean, a reflection of what we're all feeling, whether we, you know, realize it or not. But yeah, but definitely, I personally really appreciated this exhibition as an opportunity to slow down and really look and observe, you know, especially when the gallery is quiet and you could kind of have that space to yourself to really spend time with the work and just slow down, you know, in our chaotic lives. Which, speaking of which, what is next for all of you? Does anyone have anything that they want to plug or speak to that's coming up after the show closes?
Well, this exhibit is actually heading just a few towns over in the western suburbs of Chicago. Wheaton College has the Wolford Galleries. And so this exhibit will be going there for part of the month of February and part of the month of March. So for a month.
Oh, amazing. Such a good opportunity for people to see it if they weren't able to enjoy it in our space. Amazing.
And then I have a show coming up in the spring at the Shane Gallery, which is in North Carolina. I think it's in April.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. What about you, Mandy?
At Bridge Projects in Los Angeles. So if anybody wants to get warm, head on there. And the show is actually, I think it's called something like Life After Death or something like so. I'm
Perfect.
Like, oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Bridge Projects, LA.
Fabulous. What about you, Brenton?
I'm teaching lithography this spring for the first time in a long time, and I'm having a lot of fun working with big pieces of stone, and I'm excited to maybe see how that translates maybe into my own studio practice. I don't know what a litho looks like for me yet, but I kind of want to make some. I've been working through some collaborations with an artist in Italy that we're trying to get off the ground too, but no, that's about it right now.
Oh, wow. Well, sounds like a lot of exciting projects brewing for you. Really excited to see the work that comes out of that exploration. Awesome. And then I'll plug something for the museum. So we have a new exhibition opening Saturday, February 5th, entitled Naturally, which features works by Judith Rosen-Frelich and Leah Schrag, who've come together for their first joint exhibition. So definitely keep an eye out for that. But it was really delightful talking with you all and hearing more about your works and the exhibition. And thank you again for your time. This was lovely.